The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or hello in whatever dimension you might be listening. This is Ask Claire, or Claire's Corner, whatever you want to call it, whatever the mood that strikes my fancy. Anyway, this is the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and fasten your seatbelts, boys and girls, because it's going to be a bumpy but a darn fun ride, because joining me is the man, the myth, the raconteur, the legend, the one and only Gabriel Schechter. How are you, Gabriel, my friend?
I am fine, Claire, and hoping to live up to that billing.
Yeah, I gave you a heck of a build-up now. Darn it, you have to live up to it, but I think you will, because you have authored several baseball books, or may we dare call them tomes. I think of a tome as something of lasting value on a shelf, and you are indeed the author of baseball tomes. But tell us about the newest one. What's the title? Give us the elevator speech description. Tell people how they can make their lives more full, joyous, and complete by acquiring this wonderful book.
The title speaks for itself in some ways. It's called Spanking the Yankees, 366 Days of Bronx Bummers. It focuses on everything bad that's happened. Not everything, because even in this book there isn't room for everything, but all the things that went wrong for them, their worst games, their darkest moments, and beyond that, all of the heinous acts the Yankees have perpetrated, most particularly the way they have mistreated their own. So I cover the regular season, their worst games. I have something on every game they lost and every postseason series they lost. Appropriately, that's 27 series. And then the longest section of the book on the off season, which covers a lot of the off-the-field stuff. So,
the title again is Spanking the Yankees, and who's the publisher, and how do people track down a copy?
The publisher is Summer Game Books, and you can buy the book from their website or at Amazon.com.
All right. Now, let's talk about your credentials to author yet another book about baseball. And, you've got some pretty good cred, I think, as both a lifelong fan and also a professional in the baseball history field.
A lot of this research was done 12 to 15 years ago when I was working at the Hall of Fame as a researcher in the library, in the Giamatti Research Center. So I had access to all the files, archives, some collections that were on microfilm and some that had not been made available to the public at that time. For instance, the information on contracts and how much the Yankees were actually paid. Obviously, a lot of research, most research for baseball books these days is done via the internet, things like newspapers.com and other great online archives. I've had a lifelong hatred of the Yankees. My parents were National League fans, and I grew up 8 miles from Yankee Stadium, so Yankees country, surrounded by the Yankees, and my parents just didn't like them. So I was brainwashed in that regard. But I have found it a worthwhile, lifelong, worth the effort to be a lifelong hater of the Yankees. I've always liked one or two of their players. The first guys I liked were Moose Skowron and Jim Bouton. I was lucky enough to meet them both years later, and both cool guys. Right now, I kind of like Giancarlo Stanton. We have the same initials, which is a big plus. But as for the franchise, I loathe them. And my research at the Hall of Fame confirmed that. They really are as heartless and cold-blooded a franchise as their enemies make them out to be. And they always have been.
Do you think that they're particularly bad, even when compared to the other small-minded men who have controlled baseball through the decades, or simply a bunch of miscreants who just happen to be very lucky on the field?
Well, I mean, you can't deny the Yankees' greatness on the field.
Sure.
And it was put together by really four men. Jacob Rupert, who owned the team from 1915 to 39, who hired Miller Huggins, the manager through the 20s, and hired Ed Barrow as general manager. Barrow was a tremendous executive. And Barrow hired George Weiss, who stuck around, took over that job, and was the architect of the Yankees dynasty that lasted through the mid-'60s. But I'd like to read something about Jacob Rupert to you.
Yeah, please do.
From
I was going to say,
Rupert was a fascinating character. He was he built Yankee Stadium. He hired all these people who put together the dynasty. He was a well-known man about town in New York. And let me read this paragraph to you. Well, it's a couple of paragraphs, but it sums up my feeling that the worst thing the Yankees have done is the way they've mistreated their big stars, and Rupert started that tradition. I'm reading now. In public, he was a gruff and rather humorless man, all business. In private, he was a different man, a lifelong bachelor who wound up leaving 1/3 of his estate to a former showgirl companion. He became known as a spendthrift with a penchant for collecting. Everything but a wife, quipped Virginia Irwin in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and for investing in harebrained schemes. Collections included Chinese porcelain, exotic animals, yachts, first editions, horses, 65 items bequeathed to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and much more. As for his bad investments, Irwin reported, Colonel Rupert apparently could be depended on to buy stock in anything from a farm to raise silkworms to a scheme to grow edelweiss on top of the Empire State Building. The inventory of his estate listed 45 issues of valueless stock. That's the part I can't forgive. Rupert wasted millions getting taken in completely at least 45 times, but wouldn't pay his players, the heroes of their generation, what they were actually worth. Economist Michael Halpert has calculated that the Yankees paid Babe Ruth a paltry percentage of the income he generated for the team. Rupert paid handsomely for a, quote, priceless blue macaw valued at $100 after his death, yet he begrudged any $1,000 he had to pay to Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, and other stars. Rupert's henchman, Ed Barrow, did the negotiating, while Rupert took pot shots as needed to batter the recalcitrant future Hall of Famers into submission. Note the disparity in these accounts between the tones of the parties and see if you can figure out why Rupert chose to belittle them rather than celebrate them with conspicuous generosity. Why did he reward the crackpots and con artists while punishing the immortals? That's my burning question.
That is a burning question. There's something, certainly professional sports gives us so many examples, and of course, Rupert's spiritual, great-grandchild, George M. Steinbrenner III. But what is it about these men who achieve fame? In Rupert's case, in brewing, they achieve fortune, but not fame. Rupert, a successful brewer, Steinbrenner, a successful shipbuilder. That's not enough for them. They crave this
Well,
recognition, adulation.
they were just natural. They were natural bullies. But I give Steinbrenner a little bit of air on this alone, that he overpaid his players so much that he was entitled to some kind of grousing when they underperformed. But Rupert, in 1931, Ruth and Lou Gehrig combined to drive in 347 runs.
Astonishing.
They tied for the league lead in home runs, were 1-2 in runs batted in. However, Rupert came out and says that winter baseball, no, not even the Yankee management, cannot afford to pay such a salary. I suppose he's talking about Gehrig now. I suppose Gehrig doesn't help draw all those big crowds last summer. But, of course, he would tell Gehrig, well, they don't come to see you. They come to see the big guy. So the Yankees posted a profit of $56,000 in 1931. Rupert felt compelled to drop their combined salaries by $5,000 after that year. Meanwhile, he bought a 36-story building on the corner of 5th Avenue and 44th Street. So it wasn't that the Yankees couldn't afford to pay Ruth and Gehrig. Rupert just didn't want to. It was that simple.
Exactly.
So he gets my vote as the most heinous Yankees owner. He left an estate in 8 figures.
Right.
It came out to like $15 million, and they thought that was a lot less than they expected. But there were all those con men who took him in.
Yeah,
but Babe Ruth wasn't going to con him, by golly.
No, heck no. Yet he couldn't even give Babe Ruth, who had given more to that franchise, more to the game than any single individual. He couldn't have given him the chance to manage. And yeah, maybe the Babe would have been a disaster, but it was the Babe we're talking about. Well, that was, they both painted themselves into the corner on that one.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah. Ruth by wanting everything at once, instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And the Yankees understanding they had Joe McCarthy, who might have been the best manager of them all.
Yes.
Are they supposed to dump the best manager in baseball to give Babe Ruth a chance? Well,
tough question.
It was an impossible situation, but of course they made it worse by unceremoniously dumping him.
Yes.
And not keeping him around New York. He could have been a huge asset without being the manager.
Exactly. If they had truly been determined to find an appropriate role for him, they could have done that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have had some fun these past several minutes skewering the short-sightedness, the absolute greed and out-and-out cruelty of Yankee management. But, that's something we have learned more about with the gift of historical hindsight. But even through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, into the early 60s, there was still this, united hatred in baseball land, save for the diehard Yankee fans, that the Yankees truly were the team that they loved to hate. And was it simply a jealousy, envy, that if you were an American League fan, the odds were good before the season even started that your team was playing at best for second place, that if you were a National League fan, you were just waiting around for your team to be crushed by the Yankees that fall? Was it envy, or was there something else, something deeper going on?
Oh, that's a great question. It was both. It was everything. Certainly, it was jealousy that, especially where I grew up in the metropolitan area, no matter what you said, the Yankees fan answer was, well, we win the pennant every year. What did your team do? And so a lot of it, well, definitely some of it is a reaction against Yankees fans themselves and their notion that the universe is Yankees-centric. Mm-hmm. That you cannot tell a Yankees fan that according to the law of averages, they should only win one World Series every 30 years. That concept just does not register with them. If they go, Steinbrenner, went 2 years without a World Series and freaked out.
Sure.
That's he had all those revolving managers over the period where he wasn't winning, and he got a hold of Joe Torre and started winning, and they had two managers in 23 years. When I grew up, the cliche was that rooting for the Yankees was rooting for U.S. Steel or General Motors. Mm-hmm. That somehow it was impossible to separate rooting for the players from rooting for the franchise. Mm-hmm. And so the Yankee fans became kind of stratified by it, and everyone else became, had one more reason to be resentful of it. At least that's the atmosphere that I was raised in. The notion of American League fans and National League fans has disappeared, of course.
Yes.
But when I was growing up, and through at least half my life, it was a definite thing.
Sure. One
league's fans were not particularly aware of or interested in what went on in the other league until October. Mm-hmm.
Really?
And I think we have a much better view of things now in that regard. We're baseball fans.
Anyway,
we're baseball fans.
Yeah, but yes.
Let me read something to you.
Yes.
That's another answer to that question.
Yeah.
This notion that the Yankees are supposed to win at least a pennant in the World Series every year. I mean, George Weiss battered it into the heads of the players in the 50s that their World Series check was supposed to be, that was part of their income. We don't have to pay you that extra $5,000 because you're going to get $8,000 from your World Series check, and they bought into that. In the early 60s, Jim Bouton was told by Tan Topping Jr., the son of the owner, well, you always got that World Series check. And Bouton said, well, then put it in the contract that if we don't win the World Series, you give me the $10,000. But, of course, things didn't work that way. So one of my favorite games during the season in this book is from September 23rd, 1970. I was a teenager during the Yankees' darkest years, starting in 1965 when they slipped halfway down the standings and then finished dead last in 1966. And what is derisively called they were so bad that here's what happened on September 23rd, 1970. And this puts into focus the mentalities of winning and losing. And it has one of my favorite punchlines. 4 years after the franchise's demise, here's how thoroughly the losing mentality has pervaded the Yankees clubhouse since the departure of Yogi Berra, Whitey Ford, and Mickey Mantle. Champagne flows and spills tonight in the Yankees clubhouse in a post-game celebration after a 6-4 victory over the Senators, which clinches second place. That's what passes for glory these days at Yankee Stadium, where the paid crowd for this momentum event is a skeptical 5,082. After finishing 10th, 9th, 5th, and 5th the previous 4 seasons, they finished second. Manager Ralph Houck is all smiles in his office, flanked by equally gleeful GM Lee McPhail and club president Mike Burke, when players douse them with 3 buckets of cold water. Who can blame them? We're talking second place, folks. Oh, boy. Joe DiMaggio must have puked when he heard about it.
Oh, my God, yes. The clubhouse celebration of finishing second.
Talk about how the mighty had fallen.
Exactly.
My nomination for the low point in franchise history, by the way, was also in September. The Yankees played. Why am I thinking 65? I'll let you know in a moment. But it was a September game with the White Sox. It was a replay of a game that had been rained out twice. So it was rescheduled for a Thursday afternoon when it was about 50 degrees and raining. But they had played the game, so out they went. It was televised. Mm-hmm. My father and I were watching. It was 1966.
Yes.
And the paid attendance was 413 at Yankee Stadium. And Red Barber, midway through the game, broadcasting on TV, had the cameraman pan the stadium, virtually empty, while he lectured the fans at home on the fact that this is not very good support for your ball club, the New York Yankees. My father had the best saying. He came up with a yogiism. He said, look at all the people who aren't there. At any rate, the Yankees fired Red Barber 2 weeks later.
Yes, they did.
Mike Burke invited him to breakfast, and Barber didn't even get to drink his coffee before Burke lowered the boom on him. Barber told the press, for every man there is a time to come and a time to go. For me, the time was 8:41 this morning.
Poignant. And, gosh, I'm just reflecting. Certainly, yeah. So when the mighty do fall, they fall further, they fall harder than us ordinary mortals. And perhaps does that not give us a special delight, witnessing that fall?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and especially when it's
absolutely.
so
that's why, that's one reason why this book is timely. We have now finished the first decade when the Yankees have not appeared in a World Series since before they got Babe Ruth.
Amazing.
So it's a good time to celebrate their darkest moments.
And here I thought I would never see a darker era for the Yankees than the Horace Clarke era.
Well, of course, those were those glory days of the late 60s that we were just talking about.
And should we pause for a very brief moment of silence to recall Mr. Clarke?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, talk about a bad rap on a guy. I mean, he was maybe a little slow on the double play, but an adequate major league second baseman, but simply by the luck of timing, his arrival and departure, you get an era. Yep. Gabriel.
There are a lot of ironies and things like that, like Don Mattingly retiring just before they got real good and won pennants.
Exactly.
The greatest Yankee star never to play in a World Series.
Oh, by far. Gabriel, I think we're on the downside of the show. Do you have another excerpt, teaser to share with us?
Yeah, let me throw one at you. One of the things that set George Steinbrenner, of course, apart was all this free agent spending, but he did not always get his man. And I want to read to you in 1992, the Yankees had gone through now 12 years without getting anywhere. So he was ready to invest a lot of money. And that winter he pursued Barry Bonds and Greg Maddux. And both of them turned down the Yankees' offer to take less money elsewhere. But I want to read the passage about the Barry Bonds pursuit. This is December 1992. Gene Michael, the GM, announces that the Yankees are withdrawing their 5-year, $38 million offer to free agent Barry Bonds. Bonds said he wanted 6 years for $43 million, and Michael calls their bluff. We have to draw the line somewhere, says Michael. I have no regret saying we did not offer him a 6th year. A week later, Bonds signs with the Giants, 6 years, $43.7 million, less per season than the Yankees offer. Let's check the scoreboard. In the next 5 years, Bonds won another MVP award, finished in the top 5 3 other seasons. The 6th year would have been 1998, when Bonds hit .303 with 37 home runs, 122 runs batted in, drew 130 walks, stole 28 bases, scored 120 runs, and won his 8th Gold Glove Award. So what if the Yankees won 114 games anyway that season? Bonds would have hit a home run every other day at Yankee Stadium, smashing Roger Maris's record. He would have stayed after 1998 and soon would have been joined by Roger Clemens and Alex Rodriguez. Think of it. Picture all of them together. The 3 Musketeeroids, striding through the clubhouse, puncture arm in arm, proclaiming all for cream and clear for all.
Oh, hi. My friend, you've left me speechless, and I suspect
that's a neat trick.
That is, because anybody who knows me knows I've been a professional talker for going on 50 years, radio, politics, you name it. But my God, is that the greatest baseball dream, or is that the worst baseball nightmare? And to sum it up, it's from the book Spanking the Yankees by my co-host on this program, Gabriel Schechter. Gabriel, thank you. I thank you for sure. And everybody who enjoys an entertaining, witty, funny read, especially about baseball, find it, Spanking Yankees. And thank you for being here, Gabriel.
Thank you, Claire. It was fun.
Okay. Happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.